Welcome to the Think Factory podcast. We got one question for you. What keeps you up at night?
Hello and welcome to the Women's Roundtable podcast, powered by the Think Factory, where we learn how women think big and grow their business. My name is Susan Kleiner. I'm a partner with Outside General Counsel Solutions, and I'm the host of today's episode. I'm really happy to have with me here today Diana Dubbs. Diana is the National Director of Business Development at Peace Valley Recovery, which is a premier outpatient addiction center located in Bucks County, PA. Peace Valley works with individuals struggling with alcohol or drug use that's impacting their lives. Peace Valley helps individuals develop new coping skills, recognize triggers, and their root causes for alcohol or drug use. Diana recently started working at Peace Valley, but she's worked in the recovery field for the past 10 years, and her insights on recovery and her personal experience is just invaluable. So I'm really happy to have her here for today's episode. Welcome.
Hi, how are you?
So Diana, I'd love to hear a little bit more about Peace Valley and like what sets it apart in the recovery field.
Sure. So Peace Valley is a primary substance use provider that focuses on trauma-informed care. What's really, really special about Peace Valley is that we have a small ratio of patients to therapists, meaning that we're overstaffed on therapists. And we tend to have an open door policy when every patient comes in the door that they have access to everybody that's on site whenever they need them. So the actual program in itself does all traditional modalities of cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectic behavioral therapy, and then we use seeking safety as a trauma-informed care model to really focus on a patient's need to get down to the core of what their issues are and what their substance use, why their substance use actually started. We do a lot of individual therapy with patients. So when they're coming in at that partial level of care, which is that next level after residential, they get 2 individuals per week. And then we mix in a lot of holistic stuff. So we do equine, nature therapy, adventure therapy, light and sound therapy, because it's a whole body experience when you're recovering. If a patient's boarding with us, our housing model offers accountability and teaches somebody how to live sober with the freedoms that they're going to get in the outside world, but with supervision and what it's like to really have a curfew and chores and things that you're going to have to do in sobriety that we didn't know how to do when we were using. You know, I didn't know how to write a check or how to make a payment or how to clean up after myself or even how to have a normal conversation with outside people that weren't in active addiction. So what we try to do is set up a foundation for what life is going to look like when you're out of treatment.
Wow. So wait, I want to break that down because I heard a lot of great things and I have a couple questions for you. One of which was, I'm obviously familiar with CBT and DBT, but you talked about seeking safety, as part of a trauma-informed care. And I don't think I've talked to anybody on the podcast about that. So could you just tell me a little bit more about what that is?
Yeah, what that is really just staffing a group to make sure that there's 2 staff members in every group, to one who's monitoring the group and one who's actually facilitating the group, to make sure that there's no behaviors happening within the group that is enforcing any triggers for the patient, anything that might trigger the community as a whole, really just making sure that the patient is safe in that space for that moment, and so is the community.
Well, that sounds great. I mean, and I guess that goes to as well the fact that you say that you're so well staffed. I certainly also love the sound of the holistic, the equine therapy, nature, light and sound, where you're treating the whole body. I think I even read online that you do yoga there too.
We do. Yep.
Yeah.
We do.
And I thought the other part that you said was interesting, and I'm sure the listeners are catching on. You speak about this from a first person perspective. Like when you were out there, and I don't want to tell your story, but I mean, you talked about how you didn't know how to write a check, right? So, if people choose to work with your housing model, you're not just helping them with recovery. It's so much more than the detox and the substance abuse. It's, like you said, getting to the triggers, but also helping people with the foundation to create a new life, not just, shipping them out after a certain period of time. So,
Yeah, and I, you mentioned in the beginning, I've been in this field for 10 years, and when I chose to come to Peace Valley, it was super important to me that I kind of get back to the roots of my recovery and really what that looked like, because although being, my sobriety date is October 21st, 2013, and although that sounds like a whole lot of time, I still remember what it was like to be in early recovery, and I remember what it was like trying to rebuild what that life looks like. And I want to be able to give that back to other people. And it's super important, because what happens in those first 90 days or that first year is going to shape what the rest of your sobriety is going to look like.
so it's a really pivotal time period. So earlier on in your career, I mean, have you done, it sounds like you were a recovery advocate or something else. I'd love to hear more about your transition to being
Yeah.
the national business director.
So when I had gone to treatment, and really this is where my journey began, is I was successful in addiction, as funny as that sounds. I was functioning and I had a job, and I had a whole career in retail store management. So I ran large volume stores for big box retailers. Sorry. And then I had a short stint as a recruiter, because if anybody out there is listening that knows about addiction, knows that it's all about people, places, and things. And I had geographical changes, I had people changes, I had friend changes, because I was never the problem. It was always what was around me that was happening. So right before I had gone into treatment, I was actually a recruiter for a firm in Philadelphia for a short period of time. So for all intents and purposes, I don't know how much I looked put together, but I was kind of getting by in terms of a professional lifestyle, right? Um, and when I left treatment, I knew that I couldn't go back to the industry that I was in. And I knew that retail wasn't for me anymore. Things had just shifted in my life and needed to change. And I wanted to do something in this world of helping people, but I didn't know that my specific job function existed. I didn't want to be a therapist. I had no interest in what that looked like. I have so much respect for therapists and clinicians and doctors. It just was not for me. And so I reached out to a friend who is a therapist, and I asked her about different roles in this industry. And she quite frankly looked at me and said, "Look, a lot of people try to get into this industry. My suggestion to you is that if you can go find an organization and volunteer with them for a year and not get paid and still have a passion for this industry, then you're right for it, and you'll figure out what it is that you want to do." So I did, because in my recovery, I had always been taught that you need to take the suggestions of people who came before you. So I took the suggestion and I found an organization and I volunteered. And I learned what that organization needed from me, and I had them teach me. And a lot of it was programming in the community and helping people who had Medicaid or no insurance. And eventually they offered me a job, and I loved it. I loved every second of being in the trenches, of doing interventions for patients who didn't have anything, and building community resources for people and helping families. And I worked there for a little bit of time, I would say a little bit over a year, and I got pregnant with my second son. And if anybody's living in the world today, you know that a nonprofit is not going to pay your bills. And it was just time for me to move to a more private entity. So I had started looking around, and I got offered a position as, what the industry calls a marketer. And really what that is the face of the industry that sells the treatment program and helps guide people into treatment. And I started working for an outpatient in the Bucks County area. And I worked there for a couple years and learned a lot. I learned a lot about the industry. I learned that not all people were good people, and I learned that good people make mistakes. And I learned that even people running businesses that are suffering from this disease are victims' ability to do so. And I also learned that if I stuck to my core values and what I intended to do, that everything was going to be okay for me. And it always was, because I never deviated from the idea that I just wanted to help people. And I was honest about the fact that I wasn't going to deviate from that. Very shortly after, I was a little bit burnt out from the treatment industry because, when you see a lot of really bad things and people are dying and, they're not getting any better no matter how hard you're working, I was just starting to suffer from it, and I wanted to leave the industry as a whole. And a mentor of mine had said to me, look, like, you're really good at this job, and you need to find the facility where if your husband were to relapse, you would feel comfortable sending him to. And, and I did. And I interviewed all these places, and I found a facility, and I ended up staying there for 5 years. And again, I learned so much about people and about treatment and about, myself being a professional. And I also learned about what I wanted and where I wanted to be in my own professional life. And during that time, my children were starting to get older. They're not old by any means. They're 9 and 7, but they're old enough where they were needing me more, and their needs were through school and education. And I had a son that was, diagnosed with ADHD, and he needed more of my attention, and the other one didn't have it and he needed my attention. And I needed to be a little bit more present. And I started realizing that there was going to be a time that one of them was going to need help like me and like their father did. And I wanted to be able to provide them with people like me around them, and I wasn't working for a facility that was close enough to do that. So I decided that it was time to make a change, and I needed to find a little bit more balance. And I started looking for facilities that met my core values in terms of my recovery and in terms of what I had actually started out in this industry to do, which was to help people. Um, and during that time, I don't want to say that I was approached by Peace Valley, because I think it was more of we had a collaboration. We had worked together in partnership, and I had always loved, working with them as an aftercare provider, because they did exceptional work, and the patients that I had sent to them had done so well, that, I had, spoken to them, and they needed somebody, and I wanted to be that person, and that's how I landed at Peace Valley. And where I am now is that I feel like I have that mix of that beginning job where I'm in the trenches and I get to talk to the patients and I get to talk to the families, and I'm really in it with them and I'm walking them through. But I also get that creative aspect, and I get to do the functions that I was doing for a higher level job where, I'm developing things for the patients, and I'm, talking with the clinicians, and I get to really work through issues to have it make sense, because I didn't always get that in the past, and we're at a point now where we have the ability to grow the facility, which is exciting and it's fun and it's not terrifying, and I don't feel burnout, and that's exactly where I want to be.
Well, it sounds like you found a really great place to land, that kind of marries your professional goals, with also this kind of clinical perspective and this desire to reach out and give back, right? What was freely given to you, right? Isn't that what they would say? And so,
Yeah.
Good for you. And I also, I love your transparency and the fact that you are open about your own recovery process. I think all too often there's such stigma associated with, being in recovery, that it's really important for people like you to say, hey, just so you know, I had a job. You know what I mean? I was successful, or I was making it, in your career. It's not that everybody has such a low bottom, right? So thank you for your transparency there and for talking about it. I think it's important for people to hear, right? To help with stigma.
Yeah, I mean, not every drug addict or alcoholic is living under a bridge or a zombie in Kensington. I certainly wasn't. It doesn't mean that I didn't go down to Kensington. It doesn't mean that I wasn't, you know, I like to think that I was put together, but I will tell you that there were people that saw me that did not think that I was put together. The person that I am today, today I'm a mother and I live in the suburbs and we have a beautiful house and, my kids go to a great school and, I work really hard and you wouldn't know if I didn't tell you or if I wasn't so vocal, but I have to be vocal for a couple of reasons. Because number one, if I don't tell you, I have the opportunity to manipulate you. And that's not how I live my life today. I know that I have that in me to be a manipulator and to be a liar. And if I'm not loud about my recovery and that you don't know who I once was, then I have the ability to hide that from you. And that's a problem for me. I can't hide that from anybody. The other thing is too, is that, I have children who are products not products of this disease because my kids have never known me as anything other than sober, right? I was blessed to have my children in recovery, but their mother lived another life in a different lifetime, and they need to know where that came from, because I never want my kids to ever suffer from this disease and not know where it came from and have to wonder, why are they the way that they are, or why are they different than anybody else? Because that's how I was when I was little, and I don't want that to be their story. I want them to know, because I think that's important.
For sure it is. I mean, and then also, maybe I know that there's I think that there's a genetic factor in all of this. And so you hope that with the knowledge, that you're imparting to the next generation, maybe we stop the cycle or at least arrest it earlier. So
I don't know if we can stop the moving train, but I know that I have the ability to at least make them aware of what's going to happen to them if they do choose. I can't stop them from choosing. Just like we can't stop the drug addict that we work so hard on, or the family or the mother. We can't stop that from happening. We just have the ability to educate, and education and prevention is so important in just trying to slow down this train.
So if somebody's listening to this and if they have a problem or they know somebody who has a problem, how can they reach out and get a hold of you? And could they talk to you about it? And maybe you could help them figure out whether or not Peace Valley or somewhere else would be, a good option for them or their loved one.
Yeah, absolutely. My cell phone is on all the time. It is 609-851-2499. I don't think I have shut it off once in 10 years.
Well, that's funny because I don't think I've ever had anyone on this podcast give out their cell phone number. So hopefully, you won't get a bunch of unwanted spam. Probably not. But I mean, so people can reach out to you and you can help give them information. What's coming up? What are you excited about?
I mean, we have a lot of really big things happening at Peace Valley. One of which I can share is that we are looking to go primary mental health as an option, in addition to being a substance use provider, because that's super important. We are adding locations to our portfolio, which I think is really, really exciting, and it's a really great place to be right now, especially in this world that we're in. So I think that we have some really great options. And the other thing that's just really exciting right now is that, Peace Valley is always looking to make things better. They're always looking for feedback. What's working? What's not working? What do we like? What can we change? And that in itself is just such a change from where I've been, just being able to really share, what's working, what's not working, and have an open and healthy dialogue.
Well, congratulations. I mean, it sounds like you found a place that's a great fit for you. So what advice, if any, would you give to your younger self? Like if you could talk to the Diana from 10, 15, 20 years ago, what would you say?
I would love to have these pearls of wisdom to tell you, but she wouldn't have listened to anything that you would have told her 10 or 15 years ago. So I could tell her, don't do it, or there's still time, or wait for the miracle, or all these cliche things that I would say. But she wouldn't have listened. She had to figure it out on her own, and that's the one thing that I've learned is I'm so blessed that I've gotten to live 2 lifetimes in my life. Um, you know, that stubborn little girl had to figure it out, and she had to take the long way.
And it takes what it takes, right? Well, I'm so happy, that you made the time for me today and to hear some more about Peace Valley and some of the fun things, interesting things that you have coming up with, moving into mental health and then also some new locations. People should definitely, take a look and look at the website, to find out some more. We ask everyone that appears on our Think Factory podcasts one question, which is, what keeps you up at night?
I think the biggest thing that keeps me up at night is one day, my kids are going to ask somebody for help, and have I done enough to provide them with the resources? Because I know that they're not going to ask me for help, and they're not going to ask their father, my husband, they're going to ask somebody else. And have I provided them with enough good resources and enough good people around them to know that they have people that they can talk to? And I think that's what keeps me up tonight, and that's why I keep getting up in the morning and keep doing what I do.
Well, I think you've given your kids a really powerful example, so I feel assured that they'll know what to do next. Well, I want to thank you, Diana, for appearing. Be sure and check out our other episodes of the Think Factory podcast, where my colleagues and I highlight other important industry topics and businesses. You can go to our website, www.ogcsolutions.com, to learn more about my firm, and you can click the Think Factory to see our recent publications and podcasts. I'm Susan Kleiner. Thank you for tuning in. See you next time. Thanks so much, Diana.
Thank you. I hope it went well.